Good evening. My name is Sam Dorison, and I'd like to talk to you tonight about disagreement. Specifically, I'd like to talk to you about disagreement in public policy on some of the most contentious contemporary issues. Too often, on many of the most contentious issues, we end up with two sides talking at each other. Very rarely do they even address the same issues, let alone look for solutions. What I'm going to argue tonight is that by asking a different set of questions, by looking at some of the most contentious issues in a new way, we're in a better position to figure out our own opinions and actually arrive at solutions. The first issue I'd like to talk to you about tonight is US detention policy and Guantánamo Bay. So a quick poll of the audience. Who in the audience is familiar with Guantánamo Bay and US detention policy? And of those people, who has an opinion on the topic? Okay. What I'd like to ask you to do for the next few minutes is kind of put that opinion on the side while I talk about a part of my research. The research I'll explain to you tonight might reinforce your views, it might change them. But I think it's important to start with an open mind when discussing these contentious topics. On the screen in front of you are two newspaper headlines about Guantánamo, which I think summarize two sides talking at each other rather than with each other. The first one is a Fox News headline about the potential for closing Guantánamo last year. The second one is a Guardian headline on the same topic from 2004. And here's a quote from a US senator from the end of last year. I'll give you a second to read it to yourself because there's part of it I don't particularly want to read out loud on camera. So to give you a little bit of my background on Guantánamo, in 2009 I worked for a Guantánamo defense attorney who represented detainees held in US custody at Guantánamo Bay. In 2010 and 2011, I twice visited Guantánamo and actually interviewed the detainees held there by the US government to hear their stories and their perspectives. In 2011, I also started my own research on the topic, which is what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So I think a lot of the big questions that people have asked about Guantánamo are very broad brush. Do we agree or disagree with US detention policy? Do we like Guantánamo? Should we be using it in the war on terror? Do we even like the war on terror in general? But these sorts of questions very rarely get you to specific solutions or help you inform your opinion in a more nuanced way. What I wanted to do then was ask questions that might be more specific, that will look at some of our moral judgments and our moral opinions and how they connect to law and what we think about it. What I started with was West Point's threat criteria, developed at the US Military Academy at West Point, which went through and rated each Guantánamo detainee and their threat score on the basis of a number of factors, three of which are listed here: hostilities, fighter, and training. And so what we might ask then is, what should the relationship be between your threat score and how long you're held by the United States? I think intuitively what we'd look for in terms of justice is individuals judged to be more dangerous, more threatening, pose a greater threat to the United States and its allies, would be held longer than individuals for whom this is not the case. Empirically, this is not what we see. The graph you see here correlates the relationship between threat score and detention duration in US custody at Guantánamo. And the threat score is 0 to 3 based on the previous slide, and duration is in days. And each of the dots you see is a dot from a detainee from another country. There are two things about this graph that I'd like to point out to you tonight that I think that have a moral relevance as we think about this issue. The first one is you'll notice the three lines going from left to right are the three lines of best fit for detainees from 3 different countries. What you would like to see first off is an upward sloping line from bottom left to top right, which is to say the greater your threat score, the longer you're held by the United States. And again, this is not what you see. The lines are essentially flat. Maybe if you squint, they go up a little bit. The second thing you see is that the three lines are at very different heights for detainees from 3 different countries. What that tells you is your country of origin, where you're from, which is an immutable characteristic about you as an individual, actually has a dramatic impact on how long you're detained by the United States. So let's think about these two things morally. I think in terms of principles of proportionality or due process, you want to see the upward sloping line from bottom left to top right. And in terms of equal justice under law, you want to see these three lines at the same height, not at 3 different heights like you see here. The second thing about my research that I'll talk to you about tonight is that who captured you initially actually has a significant impact on how long you're held in US custody. If you were captured by the US or its coalition forces, you're detained for less time than an individual captured by our Afghan allies or in Pakistan. And note this controls for factors including your threat score, and other individual characteristics. This is the equivalent of saying, then, which police officer arrests you, which police force arrests you initially, is going to have a significant impact on how long you're held, regardless of the evidence against you, regardless of the crime of which you're accused. In terms of justice, this as well would raise some red flags. So the second issue I'd like to talk to you about tonight is global warming. And I'm going to start off with the same two questions I asked earlier tonight. Who is vaguely familiar with global warming, climate change more broadly? Right. And who has an opinion on the issue? In terms of what the government could do, in terms of what individuals can do. And of those people who answered yes to either of those questions, who knows how much their opinion would cost? Who knows the price tag on the things that you want your government to do? It's a smaller number. And this is important and noteworthy because in many aspects of your life, cost is something you take into account. If you're going to buy a new car, for example, you're going to ask yourself, you would ask the dealer, you would look at consumer guide reports for miles per gallon, for safety ratings, and you would also look at cost. And yet, on one of those contentious public policy issues on which you may be casting your vote, you might not have asked the question, what does it cost? This is not a question that you'd ignore on other aspects of your life, and yet, on this issue, it's very rarely discussed in the media. It's not often discussed by politicians, and it's not discussed by voters. So to conclude tonight, I'd like to finish where I started, which is to encourage you to ask a set of questions that might be different than the ones you've asked before. These could be moral questions, looking at a policy issue from a new perspective, trying to think about what about the issue you find most objectionable, trying to think about what principles underline your opinions. It could be more pragmatic, it could be based on cost or other kind of physical changes that you'd like to see. In any case, though, they're different than what you might see in the media, they're different than the headlines, and yet they're truly important. What I would argue is that by asking the different set of questions, you put yourself in a better position to develop your personal beliefs, to develop the positions for which you want to advocate, and to develop the ideas by which you are going to cast your votes for the future. Thank you.